Hey guys, what's cracking? It is Krakenation. I'm coming at you guys today with the next installment of Team Building University, and today we're going to be talking about building offensive cores. I hope you guys have been enjoying this series so far. We brought it back, and people, especially with the last video where we talked about approaching team building, if you haven't watched that, make sure to go check it out. Seems to be really enjoying what we're doing, really finding it helpful. So we're going to go ahead and continue this series. If you guys haven't checked out my competitive analysis videos or that other video, make sure to click that subscribe button to stay up to date with everything I'm doing and all of my Team Building University and Pokemon content. Let's go ahead and get right into it, guys. So today we're going to be talking about building offensive cores. And I think when we're doing that, we need to start with a really obvious first step, and that's going to be defining what is an offensive core and how do we use offensive cores. Alright, so an offensive core can be defined a little complicated, I realize, but it's really two or more Pokemon that utilize various types of offensive synergies to be more effective than they would otherwise be individually. So that's to say that it's two offensively minded Pokemon that are greater than the sum of their parts. The whole is greater than the sum of their parts. So because these Pokemon are probably there's different ways that we're going to talk about how you can build offensive cores, different types of offensive cores even. So I don't want to make a blanket statement that doesn't apply very well. But in general, I think the really big thing here is that you're going to be looking for synergy, and there's a lot of different kinds of synergy that we can look for. And in general, it's going to be based on synergy based on different offensive principles of Pokemon. So I have an example here I want to give you guys, just kind of a broad example that maybe people who are a little more familiar with competitive Pokemon know. This is a very common Generation 6 and Generation 7 competitive core. That's going to be the Dio-Sharp core of Keldeo and Bisharp. Now, obviously, Keldeo and Bisharp, we're going to go get into this pair a little more, but they are really popular as an offensive core, at least they have been for a long time, because they pair really nicely with the things that the other can't beat and the things the other struggles with. For example, Keldeo struggles with Psychic types, Bisharp poops on Psychic types, absolutely destroys them. Keldeo can't beat those Ghost types with his fighting moves. Bisharp destroys those Ghost types by Pursuit Trapping them. Alternatively, Bisharp's going to really struggle with things like Steel types, where Keldeo can come in on a Steel type and destroy it. These are all ways that we kind of can pair these things together to help beat the things they can't beat, and that's a form of offensive cores. So let's talk about the different types of offensive cores before we go any further, because there are several different types, and I think you guys need to be aware that when you're using an offensive core, you might not really have the same one as someone else, and I think this kind of communication of what kind of offensive core you're building is important when you're kind of making steps forward to building the rest of your team, knowing what principle your offensive core was built on. So the first one, obviously, is going to be a basic offensive core. That's kind of like the Keldeo Bisharp core we were just looking at. And we'll talk about more about what these cores evolve in the future, but a basic core is kind of your standard when you think of what does this mon beat, what does this mon beat, do they beat everything together, what do these three mons beat together, all that kind of stuff. That's a basic offensive core. The next up I want to talk about is pivot offensive cores. Pivot offensive cores are going to be kind of these Pokemon that use U-turn or Volt Switch or maybe even Parting Shot, usually not. Usually offensive pivot cores are going to use U-turn or Volt Switch, and they utilize these moves to switch in and out, bring in other threats on the team, bring in maybe a defensive Pokemon, but really just focus on switching a lot and always maintaining offensive momentum, specifically through these switches. So your opponent will always be playing on a back foot, because through these switches, you'll always be getting chip damage, always be getting U-turn chip damage and stuff like that. And you're also maintaining positive matchup on the field against your opponent. The next up, kind of offensive core I want to talk about is spam cores. Now, you may have actually heard about these cores in the past and not be something you considered an offensive core, but spam cores are a very real thing and actually quite competitively viable. When I talk about bird spam or dragon spam or fairy spam, these are all offensive kind of thoughts and thought processes that people have found a lot of success with in the past, and you may have never realized that a bird spam team is a form of an offensive core called bird spam, because you're spamming effective flying types that overwhelm each other's checks. Also, like dragon spam. Obviously, dragon spam not as much of a thing since fairy types were introduced to the game. The dragon spam used to be a really popular, really powerful thing. Fairy spam is now a thing, obviously. There's really a lot of different types of spam cores that really fit into that offensive mold. The final one I want to talk about is sweeping cores. And so sweeping cores are going to be different partners that can either use that spam synergy or maybe use a more basic style of synergy where they overwhelm each other's answers and you just are able to sweep through an opponent's team by using both of these sweepers. So let's talk about basic cores and kind of delve into what these are. The first step to building a basic core is find an offensive threat that you want to use. All right, they're going to try to figure out what does it struggle to beat. So, for example, with Keldeo and Bisharp, Keldeo really struggles to beat those Psychic types. So you're going to want to pair it with, especially bulky Psychic types, but you're going to pair it with something that beats bulky Psychic types. And so in this example, Bisharp is fantastic at beating bulky Psychics. So like we said, find a partner that can beat those threats. So you really have to identify yourself. All right, if I'm using Keldeo, What does Keldeo really struggle with? Keldeo really struggles with psychic types, really struggles a little bit with bulkier ghost types, for example. It might struggle with grass types, defensive grass types specifically. So we're going to want to find things that can beat those partners. They'll beat those threats. So then we also want to ask ourselves, does the synergy go both ways? So now we know that Bisharp can complement the things that Keldeo is weak to, but can Keldeo complement the things that Bisharp is weak to? And that answer is yes, because Keldeo can beat up on the steel types that Bisharp really struggles with, for example. So that synergy going both ways is important to an offensive core, because we can pair those things together and make sure that while the synergy is supported one way, it's also supported the other way, and both partners are really becoming, therefore, greater than the whole of the parts, right? Greater than the sum of the parts in that case. So like I was saying, Keldeo and Bisharp, I've already given a lot of examples obviously already, but Keldeo and Bisharp are really good partners in that sense. So taking a look at the next type of core, we're going to take a look at pivot cores. And so the first thing you want to look for is Pokemon with access to pivot moves. Obviously, you need to have pivot moves to have a pivot core. So you're going to want to look for U-turn, Volt Switch, and to a lesser extent, maybe something like Parting Shot, or maybe Baton Pass, but really Volt Switch and U-turn will be your bread and butter for a pivot core. These are make Pokemon offensive pivots in general. So then we're going to look at, again, what does it struggle to beat, but then more importantly, pivot cores, what threatens it out? Because what's good about really fast offensive pivots is they can pivot out after a move is like threatening to them, and then maybe bring in a different Pokemon on the team that can take that hit for them. So you're going to want to look for things that can threaten out and then are threatened out by, so you can switch into your next core. And that's kind of the fundamental concept behind pivot cores, is you're always keeping your opponent on the back foot and not putting your own Pokemon in situations that they could fall into, like traps or lures or failures, but you're always pivoting out and maintaining favorable matchup on the field. So then you're going to want to find a partner that can beat those threats, that also, most importantly, has access to a pivot move. So again, your partner needs to have U-turn or Volt Switch, but then similar to a basic core, can hopefully beat the things that Pokemon cannot beat and maintain favorable matchup, ideally on a switch-in. So now we want to ask ourselves, does the synergy go both ways? Again, this is always going to be really important. So now I've picked a Pokemon to pair with my first pivot that obviously has a pivot and beats the things it's weak to. But now does the Pokemon I started with also beat the things that my second Pokemon is weak to? That's going to be really important. So an example I wanted to use is actually a new Generation 8 example, and Cinderace and Rillaboom are really, really good partners for each other. So normally if we started with, let's say, we started with Cinderace being this really, really powerful Pokemon with its Libero ability, it gets pivot access, obviously it's really, really good. Now, what is Cinderace going to struggle with? Fast, maybe a Scarf ground type could really be an issue for Cinderace. Maybe a Scarf water type, or a bulky water type, or a bulky ground type. These things could all be problems. So when those Pokemon come in on Cinderace, what we want to do is want to be able to U-turn out into a Pokemon that can take those on, that could also potentially U-turn out later on in the match. So Rillaboom can come in and just absolutely eat those things for breakfast. Now, on the other hand, Rillaboom is going to be a struggle with things like steel types, for example. But now what happens when the steel type is a problem? Cinderace can come back in and absolutely destroy it, right? So that here we go, we see the synergy goes both ways. Both these Pokemon have access to U-turn, so you can maintain that offensive pressure through the match by constantly switching out. Furthermore, there's even more synergy here because Rillaboom can use grassy terrain, right? And help mitigate that, that ground weakness from earthquakes that Cinderace might deal with. So there's a lot of good stuff potentially there. You're going to be able to hopefully utilize these cores by switching and maintaining that positive pressure on your opponent through the whole match. Look at the next core, we're going to talk about spam cores. So with spam cores, you're going to want to find an offensive threat to use. And then you're going to want to find one or two partners that are fundamentally similar to the role. So bird spam is the example I used when I talked about this earlier. But really the thing with spam cores is it doesn't need to be a typing thing even. You could just spam wall breakers or spam physical sweepers or something like that. And these spam cores, the goal is to slowly overwhelm your opponent's team by reaching a critical mass, right? So eventually, let's say your opponent's physical wall is fair. If we're talking about like bird spam, for example, let's say your opponent's physical wall is a Ferrothorn, right? Ferrothorn is a fantastic defensive pivot, defensive wall in generations 5, 6, and 7. Now, how did bird spam work? Well, obviously one, maybe like Staraptor, can't break through Ferrothorn on its own. But now Staraptor can maybe dent Ferrothorn, take away 40-50% of its health, and then you bring in Talonflame, and that beats up on Ferrothorn. And then you bring in maybe like Charizard, and that, like, you see my point, like, these things kind of just overwhelm and build up and build up. Braviary comes in, and this comes in, and eventually your opponent is left without answers to these powerful bird spam users. And that's kind of the basic fundamental idea behind spam cores. You keep spamming these same attacks, until the what were ideally perfect answers to those Pokemon in the past become just completely overwhelmed and you reach your critical mass. Now, there are obviously weaknesses to spam cores. If your opponent has multiple answers to your Pokemon, spam cores are going to be a little more polarizing, where you're either going to overwhelm and destroy your opponent, or if they have multiple answers to that style of play, you're going to really, really struggle. Now, looking at Generation 8, a core I want to talk about is Copperajah and this little Galarian Darmanitan hanging out on its head, right? So these Pokemon are both really powerful physical wall breakers. They share some common weaknesses. They're going to struggle with some similar things, but thematically, they are very similar. So what you're going to be able to do with these two Pokemon is just keep sending powerful offensive attacks, overwhelm and overwhelm and overwhelm, and eventually your opponent's physical wall that they've been bringing in, that Toxapex, just cannot keep switching into these powerful attacks all game long, and it's going to eventually just get completely overwhelmed, and you're going to be able to bust through it, and then from there, look to keep busting through your opponent's team. A spam core like this, for example, will really appreciate a cleaner in the late game, because you've already smacked through all those walls, and you're going to want to support it with a cleaner to come in late game and just hopefully clean up what is remaining of your opponent's team. The final core we want to look at is sweeping cores, and I think what's important to note about these ones is they can either follow suit of a basic or a spam core. So you could have a basic core where like this sweeper beats all of these things, and this sweeper beats all of these things, and together they beat all of the things, right? That's going to be kind of a goal. That can be in a lot of different ways. It could be two physical attackers that utilize different matchups. It could be a special attacker and a physical attacker that can exploit different things. There's a lot of options there. But you could also go down a spam core road, right? Where maybe you're running a Dragon Dance sweeper, and then a second Dragon Dance sweeper, and then maybe even a third Dragon Dance sweeper. And I'm not saying that's what you necessarily should do, but there is an argument to be made that eventually your opponent can't beat all these Dragon Dancers if they keep coming after you. So that's the kind of the basic philosophy. So spam cores can also be applied to sweeping ideas too. So talking about that, like basic sweeping cores, what's nice about basic sweeping cores is they're versatile and they're less dependent on matchup to find success. Because I said you have different avenues of success, an average basic sweeping core will maybe be able to exploit team matchup better than a spam core. Like I said, spam cores tend to be really polarizing. So basic sweeping core, let's say your opponent's really weak to your Calm Mind Keldeo or something. I'm thinking of Generation 7 obviously, but let's say your Calm Mind Keldeo is really effective here. Well, maybe your Calm Mind Keldeo is really good here and your Bisharp is not, for example, your Swords Dancing Bisharp is not as effective. So in this scenario, Bisharp's going to be more of a kind of a mid-rangey offensive Pokemon that you use in the mid-game, where hopefully Keldeo can sweep in the late game, obviously. But maybe in a different matchup, your opponent's got a bunch of bulky Psychics or something, or a good Psychic type and a good Ghost type and a good Grass type, and all of a sudden Keldeo is really struggling to find ways to really utilize this move pool effectively. Maybe this is a matchup where Bisharp, for example, can really put in that young work, because Bisharp is going to be able to take advantage of that. And so through that, these basic sweeping cores have more versatile options, but it's going to be up to you as a player to be a little more skillful and realize what matchups you can exploit. There's also obviously spam sweeping cores and are a little different, but they're overwhelmed with similar repeated sweeps. Like I was talking about, maybe you just hit them with a Dragon Dance, or you hit them with a Quiver Dance and a Quiver Dancer and a Quiver Dancer or a Dragon Dancer, and you just keep overwhelming all their answers, and eventually they're just going to crumble because you've been hitting them over and over again. But now keep in mind, the problem will quickly become if you run into a matchup where your opponent has multiple answers and is built to take on these multiple sweeps, that might not be as effective. So that's something you need to keep in mind. The last thing we need to talk about is supporting an offensive core. So when you're supporting an offensive core, the first thing you want to do is find teammates that synergize with your game plan, obviously. That's really the most important thing you can do when supporting any core. Because what you're going to want to do is, for example, I think I talked about earlier, I talked about how Galarian Darmanitan and Copperajah are going to be really good partners because they're going to be able to overwhelm things, but then you might want to pair those two powerful wall breakers with a cleaner, because those cleaners will benefit from all the wall breaking you get given them. So maybe when you have that core, you want to bring in a Scarf, like, I don't know, like Scarf Cinderace or something. Something like that's a powerful cleaner, for example. And then that way, you're kind of combining some spam core principles. You're combining with the Cinderace and the being another powerful attacker, but you're also combining it with this wall breaking core that can really be useful. And then hopefully through that, you're able to find effective opportunities to clean. So that's just one example, but there are obviously a lot of more examples where there's like, maybe you need more pivots, maybe you need more hazards to support all these pivoting, maybe you need support for your sweepers like Light Screen or Memento or hazards, maybe you need additional core partners, maybe your two Pokemon still have a really big weakness, maybe the two Pokemon you're choosing to run together are fighting types and dragon types, but you still can't hit fairy types because fighting and dragon are good together because they're hitting those steel types, but you're still going to hit those fairy types. So maybe you want to throw in an offensive steel type like Copperajah or an offensive poison type like Toxtricity, and that'll help you solve that problem, right? So there could be additional core partners, and you don't need to stick to just 2. Maybe you want 3 partners in there. Finally, certain types of cores fit certain archetypes better, right? So if we think about like pivot cores, offensive pivot core that is very fast actually might be a really good fit in a balanced team, surprisingly, because those balanced teams will have access to defensive Pokemon. So let's say your Cinderace is in and something's coming at it and it's going to be really hard. Cinderace might get knocked out, but you know you're faster, so you can U-turn out and bring in your defensive Pokemon to stomach that hit and threaten to hopefully back out while that Pokemon's in the field. And so balanced cores might really support offensive pivots, for example. But a bird spam team really is just a pure hyper offense team. So you're not going to want to run a bird spam team on a stall team, for example. But there's obviously other ways you can go this, like a sweeping core. You might put like something like Keldeo and Bisharp on a bulky balance, even a semi-stall team, and that Keldeo Bisharp core will be the sole like proprietor of your offense and the sole pressure on your team, and the rest of your team is built to support that, take hits for them until they find the right opportunity to strike. So these are obviously building concepts that you're going to need to be aware of. Continue watching this series, and we'll talk about all of these things in greater depth in the future, how to build these teams. We've got a really long list of videos that are going to keep coming out. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. Offensive cores will be really helpful, and understanding them will be really beneficial to you and your competitive Pokemon play. Let me know what you guys thought about this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment down below. Rate, subscribe, all that stuff, guys. This channel is absolutely blown up. Make sure to join the Discord link down in the description below as well. And also, if you want to be a part of the Kraken Cup, that's still going on right now. So those applications can still keep coming in. But until next time, I will see you guys later. Krakenation out.